Hey, Salema to you, family. This is Amat's coming to you again with another installment follow-up to the last video, um, which is GMO seeds, the new neocolonialism. I said there would be a part two to that, but I found it necessary to really just sort of lay some groundwork before I do part two, that everyone would have some understanding of how things are done. I'm sorry. And in addition to slipping in some things that I want us to think about and see. So, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be looking at what is a genetically modified organism. And so, we're going to look at how this works, and so everyone can be able to get a simple and a good layman's view of the science behind it. So, we're going to be looking at two things in this presentation. One is going to be, what is a GMO organism? And we're going to be looking at BT corn, what it is and how it works. Okay? So, let's understand something though. The Most High created perfectly. And in the context of this presentations, that refers to plants, grains, animals, etc. Right? Plants, trees in particular, need no help. They are developed in a very complex but perfect way in their structures, and they have their own DNA to function perfectly in how they interact with nature. Now, those that claim that they can increase production, again in the context of these presentations in terms of yields and farming practices, and to according to them perfect function, etc., they have wicked intentions and are not to be believed. Right? So, what is a GMO? So, the technology to create a GMO is known in science as transgenic technology. And I want you to pay attention to that word trans, right? But that is that's another conversation for another time. So transgenic technology is used to modify the genetic makeup of plants, animals, microorganisms. And this is done in a laboratory. Now, so what happens here? So they're able to create combinations of plants, animals, bacterial, and virus genes. Now, what they're able to do with these things are functions that do not occur in nature through what we would call traditional means, traditional types of cross-pollination and that type of thing. So, there are hundreds of foods that are consumed each day that you may find in the supermarket shelves that are genetically modified. Keep in mind, though, that it is written that we are to eat that which has seed in itself, producing seed after its kind. Right? So, I'm sorry. So GMO technology involves the inserting of DNA into the genome of another organism. And in doing that, the desire is to produce a genetically modified organism plant, and that new DNA is transferred into the plant cells. Most times these cells are grown in what's known as tissue culture in the lab, where they would eventually develop from that culture into a plant. Now, the seeds produced by these plants are now going to inherit that new trait that they've inserted into the DNA. So, family, the characteristics of all natural living things are determined by their genetic makeup, whether it's us, whether it's an animal, whether it's a plant. And that genetic makeup and how it interacts with our environment. Now, when you plant a seed, That seed is going to be planted in the soil for a reason, right? Like it's like a birthing place for the seed. There's going to be a genetic interaction. Once that seed grows and it matures and bears, say, fruit, or whether it's a herb, the nutrients of that fruit or of that herb or that plant from the soil interacting with the genes of the seed is going to give you something beneficial for your body, right? What is now scary and dangerous is and unnatural is that these people come along and give the genes of that plant different instructions to produce something else, to do something else that it's not naturally it's not naturally created to do, right? So here is something that I want you to keep in mind, right? That though these new creations produce seed, the seeds are dead. Those seeds cannot reproduce themselves. So what has to happen? That brings us back to the point I made in the previous presentation. Farmers must now buy seeds, right? You should not have to buy seed. You should be able to plant whatever it is that you plant. You're then able to take the seeds from that plant, and you're able to dry them. And in turn, after those seeds are dry, you can replant them. And depending on what it is you're growing, those plants, trees, fruit trees, whatever the case is, many times can, through their own pollination and seeds, go into the ground and will spring up new trees or new plants themselves, right? So this is the nefarious twist, though. Those chemicals, I'm sorry, let me go back, because I'm missing something, right? So I guess to the extent that these organisms are genetically modified, they must now be fertilized with specialized fertilizer, right? Chemical fertilizers that are designed to help them grow. Because remember, these seeds are dead, and a gene has been knocked in or knocked out. So something has to happen in order for that seed to sprout open. It cannot naturally interact with the soil. So now whatever they make to work in conjunction with it has to be applied. And this is where the fertilizers and the chemical things such as Roundup and Miracle-Gro and all these different things come into play, right? This is the nefarious twist, though. Those chemical fertilizers will now modify the soil, and I pointed this out before in the previous presentation, which means that only those GMO seeds or plants will be able to grow in that soil in which they've been planted, right? All of these products are partners in the crime. The GMO plant, the fertilizers, and the weed killers. So again, remember, none of this genetic change of any of these things can occur naturally in nature. So we're going to look at BT corn. I hope that explanation of what is a GMO helped you to just get a little bit of understanding of how this works. So let's look at the BT corn, right, as I mentioned in the GMO seeds video. Though I will not discuss them here, there are also a lot of other BT products. There are BT potatoes, BT sweet corn, Roundup Ready soybeans, their Roundup Ready corn, and things that they call Liberty corn, right? I'm going to read a quote before we get into this. This is from Dr. O. Cheng. He's the Secretary General of Kenya University Biotechnology Consortium, known as Kubico. He states, this is in, I believe, August of 2023. He states that the BT maize slash corn will enhance farm level productivity by restoring yields. It will also improve food safety by eliminating the pests that make it easier for fungus to infect maize and cause aflatoxin. We'll get into what aflatoxin is later, but he's basically saying that a natural food is harmful to humans. So BT corn will eliminate this. I want you to keep this in mind. Anything I want to put into your head, is corn real or was it man-made? We're going to touch on that later. So let's get back to the topic of BT corn. So the BT corn, a genetically modified organism, or GMO as we call it, has been both what we would call the poster child and thorn in the side of the plant biotechnology industry, right? From the late 1990s to now. There's several versions of this transgenic crop, that each have a gene from an insect pathogen, right? It's called the Bacillus thuringiensis, BT, which encodes a protein toxic to the European corn borer. Notice, the European corn borer, an insect pest that eats and destroys corn stems. BT corn supposedly has proven effective in reducing crop damage due to ECB, the European corn borer. Yet public opposition to BT corn has escalated among fears of human health and environmental risk associated with the production and the consumption of BT corn. Yeah? So we're going to look at some things, and we're going to look at what the data says with respect to BT corn or GMO corn, and we're going to look at some of the risk, and we're also going to look at some studies, because remember they said that this corn is non-toxic, but studies say different. So a company like Monsanto, as one of the main producers of these BT corn maize products, right, have gathered its own crude statistical data. Remind you, gathered its own crude statistical data after conducting only a 90-day study of a genetically modified organism that they created, right? Now, even though chronic problems can really be found in anything that any genetically made organism after only 90 days, they concluded that the corn was safe for consumption, right? The stamp of approval, however, may have been premature. So in research studies, the effects of consumption of BT corn, BT maize, all of it, was mostly centered in kidney and liver function, the two major diet detoxification organs, right? But the details differed with each GMO or GM type. And in addition to that, some effects on heart, I think it was the adrenal gland, spleen, and blood cells were also frequently noted. Now, as there normally exist, there are differences. There are sex differences in liver and kidney metabolism, and the highly statistically significant disturbances in the function of those organs seen between male and females cannot be dismissed as biologically insignificant, as has been proposed by Monsanto, right? So remember, their study was only 90 days. You cannot form any conclusion after 90 days. So it's easy to conclude that the data that was used when we looked at when consumption, right, of this product over a significant period of time was gathered, that the data suggests and points to the fact that the GM maize varieties can and will induce a state of what you call heptathermal toxicity to the liver and to the kidneys, right? Now, these substances have never before been an integral part of human and animal diet. These are the things that they have created that comes out of the BT maize, right? And so therefore the health consequences of those who consume them, especially over a long period of time, is unknown. Now, one of the things we need to look at is that these companies such as Monsanto, DuPont, GlaxoSmithKline, all of them, most times work in conjunction with the very bodies that are supposed to police them. One such body is United States Department of Agriculture. Now, it's important to mention these agencies because they are the bodies that tend to put together the work, or I'd say the body of work that gives muscle to these companies and to these products to be out there in the public domain for sale and for use. So, what is the history of BT corn, right? Listen, I want you to listen to how far back this goes, right? BT corn, or the genetically modified corn, right, has its origins going way back in France, way back as far, I believe, as 1938, right, where the bacteria was grown in large quantities, very large quantities, and sprayed on corn crops to prevent, again, the ECB damage. Artificial selection, I think, of BT corn strains supposedly has led to successful targeting of many insect pests because no toxic effects, according to them, of BT on humans were detected in its 70 years of use. How can this be? How can this possibly be when they come back and tell you, even today, to avoid certain eye drops that are artificially made because they've now come to the conclusion that they cause harm to your eyes. This suggestion that these genetically modified organisms that do not occur in nature, and all of nature is synchronized to work together, right, in perfect function, cannot harm, would be akin to saying that when a cigarette was introduced on the scene, and for almost 100 years or so, all of these huge cigarette companies were saying that cigarettes were not harmful to the health in any way, when in fact the evidence was there without studies that people that were smoking were getting lung cancer, emphysema, and all these different things. So this is akin to that type of statement when it comes to these, right? So let's look at some of the things, the problems that we have with respect to GMO corn. And keep in mind that you can use this corn to produce various things. And even if based on what they want to claim, the direct consumption of the corn as a food is not harmful, which is not the case. Because if it is made to burst open and explode the gut of insects that eat it, thereby supposedly tamping down insect infestation during the corn growing time, I should say growing season, if you may call it. Of course, these things don't really have a season; they can be grown all year round. But in respect to the corn's time that it's in the field, it must have an effect on a person when they eat it. There's really no relative difference in that way, and that can be explained another time. So let's look at GMO corn and what are some of the things that are made from it and how those things are directly harmful to us. And one of those things is corn syrup. You have corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup. And we're going to look at how these things work, right? And there are other corn derivatives that are found in one form or another in just about every food label imaginable, right? And so what are the issues? Everything, unfortunately, if you want to say internationally, many times are based off what you call the SAD, the standard American diet, right? For us as a people, those of us that were taken away, our forefathers during the slave period, and even those our brothers and sisters in Africa, or Al-Kebulon, suffer many times from the same maladies because the marketplace from which our foods come, i.e. supermarkets, many of those ingredients and products are coming from Western markets. Now you need to keep in mind that Western markets is not just the United States, it's also all European countries. All of those countries are considered the West, right? Canada, France, the UK, all of these places. Okay, so let's look at how this works, right? So industrial corn is what we'll call BT corn, right? Is in its natural state. In its natural state is inedible, right? Most BT corn is not really grown for you to take it out of the field and take it home and cook it and roast it or whatever you're going to do. If you try to eat it, you would probably be hacking and retching. It would not taste very good, right? These things are made purely for processing, right? So that the oils, the starches, and low quality proteins can be extracted from them. And so what happens, these components, after intense industrial processing, are then injected into various stages of the food supply, right? From oils to baked goods to snack foods, right? And one of the biggest offenders that we have out there that is used in a lot of things, it's what's referred to as corn syrup. And I'm sure if you go to the market, wherever you are, if you're in Tanzania, if you're in Kenya, wherever, and you go into your large supermarket and you buy some of these processed foods that are packaged, whether it's crackers, cookies, whatever it is, and you read the label, you will see that one of the additives is going to be corn syrup, or high fructose corn syrup, or some other derivative coming from corn. Now, high fructose corn syrup, right, and corn syrup, which are commonly known as what you call HFCS, they're everywhere. They're in candy, they're in candy bars, it's in sodas, cakes, baked goods, and dressings. It's in ketchup, it's in other types of condiments, you find it in bread, it seems to be in every food label. Now, it will surprise you, though, to find out that corn syrup solids, not high fructose corn syrup or corn syrup, are the main source of carbohydrates in infant formulas. Yes, infant formulas, which we should not be using. Again, this is another conversation for another time. Now, let's look at how these things can wreak havoc in our system. The main problem that we have with genetically modified organisms is that they have had their genes biologically altered. Now, this is done to surpass the natural and reasonable boundaries of nature that the Most High has set there in its perfection. These plants will grow faster. They produce their own pesticides internally and are more resilient to heavy-duty pesticide sprays, right? And I often laugh and I say, well, may I order an extra dose of Roundup, right? Now, they're engineered to be genetically sterile. I mentioned that before. They're unable to reproduce subsequent generations, right? For example, most corn has been genetically modified to produce its own pesticide, what is referred to as Bt toxin, in the corn itself. So how does the Bt toxin work, right? Well, What it does is it causes the inside of the intestines of certain bugs, which I mentioned before, that eat the corn, to rip open when they eat the corn, right? Which has made some of us wonder, has this contributed to the rise in what's called leaky gut syndrome and a whole lot of food allergies? I think if you go back and you walk it out, you will see that the rapid increase in genetically modified organisms in the marketplace, you can see a direct correlation to the increase in certain health maladies, whether it's leaky gut, whether it's rise in food allergies. You should not be allergic to food. You should not be allergic to an orange, to grapes, to anything that is grown and produced and comes forth of its natural state as it's created from nature. It just should not be. You have things that you have increased high incidence of polyps in particularly our women. And these are things that should be concerning, right? These things correlate and are tied into the fact that hybrid food is being produced, food in which genes are knocked out of one thing and knocked into another. Tomatoes, for example, in the U.S., 90% of all tomatoes are genetically modified. And that genetical modification could mean the knocking in of a gene from an animal. It's just one, as they would say, one hot mess, right? Now, high fructose corn syrup, you use the word fructose. It sounds good because, hey, fructose in itself is not necessarily bad, right? You find fructose in fruits, somewhat they call the vegetables, and unrefined sugar, things like honey, right? However, but the fructose that's found in things like high fructose corn syrup, as well as diets high in high fructose corn syrup, have been linked to an increase in what is referred to as fatty liver and liver inflammation. Why? Because the liver is the most critical organ for detoxification, right? The last thing that we want to do is to add undue burden to the liver and the job it plays each day in detoxifying our body, right? Now, what is rare but has become a very significant thing is what you call fructose intolerance. You shouldn't have it. No one should have fructose intolerance because these are things, fructose is naturally found in many fruits and many types of things that you can eat from the tree that grow naturally, right? So it's fair to connect the damaging effects of high fructose corn syrup with that intolerance. One, the balance is not correct. Why? It's a different organism. You're now using it to produce something that just simply does not occur. Would you not be able to produce this high fructose corn syrup in any other way, right? So when you have this intolerance, you're going to see cases for small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, right? And when you have this overgrowth, you're going to have what you can refer to as leaky gut and other things going on, wreaking havoc in a poorly functioning gut. And so you have people that suffer from many digestive issues that when you go to your doctor, they cannot put their finger on to why, because these are not things that they understand, and these are not things that they are able to pinpoint, right? So there you have it. This is just a small breakdown of what is a GMO, how it works, and giving you an understanding of BT corn and what it's used for and why it's produced. And so part 2 will be the next thing that you will be hearing from me. Part 2 of GMO seeds, the new neocolonialism. So I'll see you again in the next couple of days, family, and salama to you.